Welcome everyone to The Shift, powered by Degreed. It is your community of skill-minded professionals that are passionate about the future of work and beyond. Today, we're going to have an open conversation about the future of skills. There is a great debate whether or not to skill or not to skill. And just to start us off with a little bit of statistics, 8 out of 10 organizations are facing immediate skills shortages, and the skills first organization is becoming an attractive solution for many organizations. And some common statistics that I think many of you have heard over the course of the last year is that early adopters of skills first approach are experiencing increased financial performance. 52% are more likely to be innovative and are retaining high performers. As we think about all of that, there is also a different narrative around skills first explosion and the growing skepticism around whether or not skills-based organizations are too simplistic and not really delivering on the question around how we can encourage performance. And so with that, are you a skills first perspective, or are you looking at it more in a cautious or optimistic way? In order to unpack this conversation today, I'm super excited to have my two colleagues in Canada, Gina and Lori, who will unpack some of this conversation today. And so, as a way of introduction, wanted to introduce Lori, skills strategist, owns a consulting firm, Niles-Hofmann. She has been in the community driving design thinking and learning strategies for many, many years, both in Canada and globally around the world. I'm sure you've heard her talk about some of this disruption, and really excited to introduce her today. Gina, of course, ex-CLO of BMO, but she's doing some exciting things after many, many years at BMO, consulting, working for universities and consulting with global firms across the globe, and also leading the way around the conversation around skills and skills-first learning. And so with that, let us have a conversation around skills. So Gina and Lori, welcome. Why now do you think we're having this conversation around skills?
Lori, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, the reality is that it's come up and down. I mean, I think that we've heard of skills before, and is skills the new black? I think the real reason for it now is we finally have the technology to catch up with it. And we're able to do these things at scale that we couldn't do before, where really we were managing this type of thing, on Excel spreadsheets, and we just couldn't get it done at scale. I mean, think of it if you're in an enterprise client, 100,000 employees, and how do you manage that data? How do you get predictive about it? How do you be proactive about it? What can you possibly do with it? And I think now, with all the ways that we can triangulate data, we can understand and infer insights from data that we couldn't before. That's really been the game changer in my opinion when it comes to skills, and I think that, combined with the fact that organizations need to be a lot more flexible and agile in how they structure themselves and get work done, that too is where skills come into play.
100% agree, Lori. And I actually think it's a perfect storm in a lot of ways. So technology absolutely is equipping and enabling better skills insights, better skills enablement than it ever has before. But I think coming out of the pandemic, we have a very different view around the importance of skills. So it was something that was really big for L&D organizations, learning leaders, et cetera, for probably a decade or more. But I think now you've got every level of leadership in the organization starting to pay attention to skills, because they can't get enough skilled people to be able to do the work that needs to get done to drive the business outcomes that are required for their organization to be successful. So now the CEO is talking about it, the CTO, the CIO, et cetera. And I think the third leg of the stool beyond technology and leadership focus is now the hype cycle in the media, where no matter what you open, no matter what you watch, no matter what you read, there's some sort of declaration on skills and shortages or opportunities or areas of focus, etc. So I think even those who weren't paying attention can't avoid it now. So you kind of have these things all coming together. And as much as skills bubbled up in learning, it's now become something that is an industry focus.
I
Um,
would agree. I might also add to that. I know we had a nice, neat three-legged stool, but maybe we make it into a four-legged table. That's
that
okay.
sounds, yep.
Make furniture. When you really start peeling back the layers of skills, and we talk a lot about skills in terms of the organization and in terms of profitability, I do think there's a lot of empowerment that comes from looking at an individual from a skills perspective rather than a job title. All of a sudden you get all of these deeper facets and more individuality, and you get closer to the core and ethos of what people want to do and where they're going with their career, which I just don't think we got when you were like, an associate to a manager to senior manager to VP. That is gone. So I think it lends itself very well to that career agility.
Well, you guys said a lot of things. Lori, if I was just to unpack, there's some skeptics out there that might say skills is a little too simplistic in terms of defining what an employee does or doesn't do exactly. Would you say that's true, not true? Is it missing?
I
Yeah.
it can be missing things. The thing is, yes, in some ways it's going to be reductive, but then to me, a job title and only, and maybe even competencies are even more reductive. So we're getting closer. I think is what I'm saying, and there's no way that we're going to be. There's not going to be perfection, but the more we move in that direction, I think it takes us it takes a better path.
Yeah. I
So
want
I
to
think
unpack something that Gina said. So Gina, you
Mhm.
talked about this is not just an L&D problem. This is the problem of the CEO and what's happening to the future of a lot of work and organizations. And so pull that thread a little bit for me. This is not a learning problem.
Well, I think, one of the interesting challenges that's bubbling up right now is that you have a skills infrastructure that's often part of the learning function in one way or another, either through the technology or something that they've created themselves. And you've got parts of the talent organization or the tech organization or other parts of the company that are starting to buy into things that have its own taxonomy or ontology or what have you. And so I think, you know, that's an interesting problem to have because everybody's paying attention to skills. But the real challenge now is to focus in a united way around what problems are we trying to solve? How do we make it really easy to have and consume data everywhere? So the same skills are being used to think about how to solve the organization's strategies and priorities, to be able to define work and jobs, to be able to think about talent mobility and hiring and performance and so on. So it's the exact same skill labels, the exact same Lego blocks. So is it a bit reductive? Sure, but it actually enables us to assemble and reassemble Lego blocks based on the type of work that needs to get done, but also how we prepare for the future. So as we upskill and reskill and what I like to call pre-skill people, the same Lego blocks can be coming into play and be reconfigured no matter what type of work you're trying to do, no matter what type of things you're trying to prepare for. And I think if you have a common set of Lego blocks everywhere in the organization, then you've got a common language and a common focus, and you're able to consume the data in a clear and simple way to be able to focus your attention on how you mobilize those skills to be able to drive impact.
Yeah. Someone,
Totally agree. I was also going to say to Janice Burns also too, if you're not following her, please do. Super smart, huge fan. But she mentions here that skills give you an indication of what employees have the capabilities to do. However, it doesn't mean it's what they do today. And I think that's a really important point. When you look at some of these skills, inventories that people have, you may uncover things that maybe they have the skills, but stuff they don't want to do anymore. Hello, I'm looking at me in anti-money laundering law that I never want to see again, but I got 15 years of it. But then there's other things that people may have that they are really skilled at that aren't being utilized within the organization, and they are things that people want to be doing. So there's a lot in that. Sorry to jump in there, Susie.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
and
no.
I think building on that, Laurie, if you don't mind, Susie,
Yeah.
is I think this is the opportunity to level the playing field through skills. So you have diverse talent everywhere in your organization and out beyond your walls that have the skills to be able to drive impact through work. And we may not be able to traditionally find those employees who have the skills to be able to create that impact, but through skills you can. You can actually look at the skill profile you need, find the people who match it, and they may not have been part of the organizational areas that you would anticipate or the backgrounds, experiences that you expect, but they absolutely have what's needed to be able to get work done and drive an impact. So I think it's so powerful because it enables you to think differently about the talent in your organization and what they can bring to the table.
Amazing, amazing. I encourage everyone to ask questions in the Q&A channel. Laurie and Gina, there's a question from Becca. Interested to understand the panelist point of view on the best way to teach learned skills.
It's a big question. um hard to answer in a nugget, but the way that I would be leaning more towards in this is by doing. I think there's, you can get knowledge and you can learn from that, you can learn from pathways, and it's always a great way to start. But you need to be putting in, especially for the technical skills that we need for the future, is that job shadowing, that practice, that simulation, all of those things, that mentoring, that coaching, all of that needs to encapsulate that process is probably what I would put in there.
Well, I think, building on what you said, Laurie, it's not just about curious exploration. It's not just about knowledge. It's about being able to build and apply skills to be able to deepen how people are able to actually use them for work. And so I think so often we focus in on the um, I finished this, as opposed to I can do it. And so the time required to be able to move through that process from learning to reflecting to applying, I think takes longer than we typically give credit to. And so I think, you need to start early and you need to devote the time and be able to have an objective way of determining whether somebody actually can apply it and how they apply it and the impact of applying it, etc. And I think that's where we tend to stumble a little bit. It's not just about having, gone through a program.
Agreed completely on that. And also too, we have I see attending is Julie Dirksen. We just had a great conversation in London last week. Highly recommend her latest book, Talk to the Elephant, which really is about designing those wonderful experiences. But yeah, there's a lot that can be said about that. But I would also add too is that I see that learning in any form is also too a tax that is on an individual. And what I mean by that is we have to use it wisely. And that's why we talk about, at our company, we talk a lot about right skilling, is that every time a person takes time to learn or invests in a skill, that's their time, their money, they're taking it away from their day-to-day lives, all of those sorts of things. And we want to make sure they're doing it for the right reasons, and that it's something that's going to help them grow. So really giving them direction, I think, is also too quite important for them to understand what skills are sunsetting and what skills are evolving.
Yeah, Laurie and Gina, there is, we have a wide range of people on the call from various parts of the world. Everybody is on a different level of the journey. And so some of the things that we talk about, but you'll love this question, which is, can you define the difference between skills and competency?
Over to
Laurie, I
you,
know you have
Gina.
a brilliant definition. Do you want to jump in first? You're very good at doing this.
I'm gonna have a controversial one, actually. I'm gonna have a controversial one in that if that's what we're debating, I don't know if that's the right conversation. Meaning when I work with companies and they start going down this path, I'm like, that's not the conversation to be had. You have to look at your industry, and a skill is going to, in my opinion, and I know there are purists out there who are already fingers at keyboards ready. But from a purely practical standpoint, to me, a skill is what an organization needs that skill to be. What do I mean by that? So say, for example, you're a bank. I'm just going to use very generic. Let me just say writing, which again, I know people are going to say, well, that's not a skill, but let's bear with me. That's going to be a skill in terms of what a bank needs it to be. If you are a media outlet, though, writing is now going to have all sorts of other skills with it: SEO, funnel writing, all writing for engagement, whatever it's going to be, and that's going to be needed for that organization. So I'm a little bit loosey goosey when it comes, and fast and loose when it comes to skills, and I know that others would debate that. But to me, as long as you are speaking in a way for people to understand what you mean by that thing, the skill, then that's what works for the organization, as opposed to trying to get everybody to agree what is a skill. Fight Club. Anyone else?
No, I'm so with you, Lori, and I'm not a purist either.
Okay.
I think in a lot of cases when we talk about competencies, that's where organizations just make it a cottage industry, and we could all be long retired before agreeing on a full-on competency model. And so I think skills, because it's that Lego block kind of approach, it makes it easy to get everybody on the same page. It may not be perfect, but get everybody on the same page and start to put these things together, start to apply them, start to define them, start to use them in action. And I think that makes a huge difference. It's better to start than to not start, right?
Well, this is where, I think a lot of CEOs believe, and I think the stat that I had seen was 90% know that skills is important for their organization. But only about 20% are experimenting and understand how this should progress. Why the complexity? Why is it not moving faster, in your opinion?
You want to give that one a try?
I think I think sometimes part of the skepticism in organizations is that there's been lots of false starts in not just around skills, but around a number of things in this kind of space.
Mhm.
And so I think there's so many players in the industry, there's so many narratives in the industry, they're afraid of getting it wrong. So it's waiting, it's holding back, it's figuring out who's going to become the dominant players, etc. And one of the things that I really believe strongly is not to let technology drive your strategy, but have your strategy drive the technology that you choose. And so I think there's that push and pull right now, and a lot of the tech is it's a big investment for organizations, and I think they're just worried that they'll go down the wrong path versus starting in a way that's true to them, that's true to their strategy, true to their culture, etc., and build from there, experiment in low risk ways, be able to develop a perspective, be able to move forward versus putting all your chips in the middle of the table on a single thing that may not actually be the right match for you.
Right.
Agreed. I think I would also add to that is one of the things with skills, is being a skills-based organization, that's funny, is that someone has to own it, but it's not immediately clear who owns that strategy. L&D will want to own it. I actually don't think it's an L&D ownership. I think they're fun part of those, but you need to have buy-in for all the way across, and it's going to impact everything, not just your right skilling programs, but it's also going to impact comp and ben. It's going to impact mobility. It's going to impact everything. Well, the chief skills officer, and it's interesting that Jan brings that up. Big advocate for the chief skills officer if you have one, right? And I think that it's a great thing to have in an organization. But again, that's very forward thinking. And for those who are unaware, this chief skills officer is a person who knows the business and is able to identify, because essentially every time you are upskilling or doing an upskilling strategy, you are hedging your bets. Okay, like you are saying, these are the skills that I think are going to be in demand. This is what I don't think I'm going to be able to find on the market, etc. It's a whole complex factors. It's gambling for skills, right? A chief skills officer is going to be able to hedge some of those bets probably better, because they would know the industry and the direction that they're going in.
Got it. Well, a lot of this comes down to delivering business value. I think one of the things that we all talk about is impact performance. I think Jan just sent me a question here around what's the best way to validate skills, and do you start with self-assessments? It sounds learning-esque, but that is some of the data points that's going to get people to understand what we're talking about. Thoughts?
I think it depends on what the risk is around getting it right. And self-assessments are a good starting point. They're very subjective. So are manager assessments. I think the more it's really critically important to get a clear view of the proficiency level, the recency, a deep profile around skills, the more you want to get into an objective measure, either something that is more of a tested skill assessment or an observed skill assessment, because you want to make sure you get it right, and you want to make sure you're taking an objective view and you're not bringing personal bias into play, whether that be from the individual or from those around the individual. So for me, it's a risk assessment around how much it matters to you to get it right. And it also is about how deep the proficiency needs to be. If you're talking about something that is really critical to your business success and something where a certain level of proficiency is important, then invest in going deeper and getting an objective assessment.
And I think we're also going to see an explosion. Agree with all of that, Gina. We're going to see an explosion of some more of these skills assessments. Some for good, some I think we need to be skeptical of. Because there's also too a fine line between what is monitored and data privacy and all sorts of things like that. But it's certainly a conundrum that a lot of people are grappling with, and how do you remove that bias? Because ultimately, I'm a firm believer, if we get a skills-based organization right, you actually are making a more equitable workplace, and you are more inclusionary, because it's eliminating some of those things that we normally look for. We get the uncovered talent.
And I think that AI is playing an important part in our ability to to do skills assessment at scale, and to be able to interpret the results and consume the results and do something about them. And so I think that's actually a really powerful enabler, whether that's embedded within a system, or whether it's a private learning model, or private language model rather, or some other mechanism. But I think AI is actually enabling us to do more at scale in a faster way.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right. I have a question. I think it's Andrew Barrett from Canada. So let me just ask this question. What factors should a company take into account when deciding if a given skill gap for a group of employees is best addressed through an internally developed learning experience or one provided by a third party?
Ooh, and first of all, hi, Andrew. Great to see you. And yes, Canadians are taking over this. Andrew, I see you in the chat there. So if I just to recap, it was deciding whether to use a third party or something internally developed, correct? I got the question right? Yeah, buy or build.
Yeah.
To me, I think it really depends on how intrinsic the skill is and unique to your industry. So for example, if you're just doing project management in general, I'm probably going to say buy it, like get tried and true. However, you're building it, if it is project management for a transformation from a factory to an automated system, that sort of thing, then to me, that's going to be, you want your stamp on that. But I'm also a big fan of working with content vendors on what is carving out that, okay, just give me the generic stuff, and then I will layer on top what actually needs to be important, and for my own subject matter experts. That said, when you do look at content and how it's being consumed and used and shared, and that has impact, I don't think that, well, I'm going to say it's probably 90% of the time when I look at people's LMSs and I do some deep dives, the content that is usually the most, popular or impactful, any of that has been developed internally. And it's usually somebody who's like out in Saskatoon or, wherever they are in some outpost, Gibraltar, wherever, who's seen a need and they develop something and it just has a phenomenal impact to the organization. So I think you have to see yourself reflected in the learning. You have to see yourself reflected in the way that that content is designed and built, in the way it's constructed and spoken of, and all of that. And that sometimes only comes from having your internal imprint upon it. There are also two cost factors, which is why, as I said, I prefer to do that hybrid to get that together.
Hi, Andrew. I think that it is an and, because part of it depends on what you actually want to achieve. And so I think a lot of the foundational learning, absolutely take it off the shelf if it meets your needs to build a solid foundation that you can then wrap context around for your organization and go deeper on the things that are unique to your organization, especially when it comes to elements of culture or elements of competitive advantage, etc. Those are the things you want to invest in making specially for your company. But when it comes to the foundational stuff, why would you duplicate something that exists in the industry? Leverage it, curate from it, and then, be able to, whether it's pathways or programs, wrap your context around the outside so people understand how it fits in your organization, and then deep dive on the things that differentiate you.
I would also say too, now there's so many possibilities to do that curation. And for those who don't know in the audience, Gina and I go way back. She hired me as a baby instructional designer back in 2000. And I remember going back, and we were not even able to take stuff from YouTube or articles. You could not include in learning because it was considered copyright and proprietary. And now you can do that. So you can really put together things that are going to suit your organization.
Amazing. Well, we talked a little bit about why skills, why now. I think some of the things that have come out is it's complex. There's a lot of layers, and obviously there are strategies at play and value propositions at play, whether it's for the employee from a career perspective, or what many people are saying now, this is a true transformation. It cannot be driven by learning alone, but from tops down, bottoms up, across horizontally. I think a lot of the people who are here are here because they want to ask those questions, right? They're starting their journey. I have this one. What advice would you give to a team just starting to shift towards a skills-based structure? What would be some of the short-term goals and actions to take versus the long-term actions? Obviously, there's a lot of layers here. Thoughts?
So I always think about the analogy of, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. And so I would look at your business strategy and your people strategy and say, what is most important to your organization? What are the skills required to be able to get those things done? And then prioritize, it could be 5 or 10, like a fairly small number of skills that you can then put meaningful attention on and be able to identify what you have, what you need, what the gap is, and how to fill that gap. And then, that is meaningful progress. So then you can start to see a real impact on what your organization is focused on. You can get real measures of the skills and how you're moving the dial. And then you can kind of go out from there, but work with your business leaders to make sure that you are absolutely hardwired to what matters in your organization. You'll see your successes, you'll see the things you might do differently, and then start to kind of go out from there, taking more and more skills, more targeted focus on specific areas that also matter to your organization, and then start to develop a better skills-based approach across your different people systems and across the company.
I completely agree, of course, because Gina's brilliant. The other thing that I think that what L&D sometimes runs away with is your focus as an L&D professional here really is that upskilling part. So make sure you have that in place. So it may even be that you just focus on one skill to run a pilot with, but you include everything, and you're able then to go back to the business and say, this is the cost, this is the time, this is the investment that needs to happen, this is how long that person's going to need to be off of their day-to-day job, this is where they're, all those things need to be put into place so that you have that strategy to say, this is how it works, right? Think of it like product management management is what you're trying to do here. You're product managing, and what you are producing is a skill. And being able to do that is very important, because a lot of times, and we touched on this earlier, that the leadership doesn't really understand what it actually takes to upskill, and they're just thinking, content library, and everybody will take what they want and we'll all magically be upskilled, and isn't that wonderful? And it just doesn't work that way. But definitely that's starting small, and being precise about that.
And I think to your point, the business of learning matters. And so I think taking a business focused approach in the same way that every other function in the company takes a business focused approach serves you well. So we're talking about skills insights and skills expenses and so on, but it's important to take that sort of philosophy across everything you do. How do you make sure that you're a well-run shop? How do you make sure that you've got targeted metrics? How do you break down skills to value? And how are you able to articulate the impact that you're making, both in the things that are specific to the programs and skills that you're advancing, but what are the business connections to that? How are you actually improving business outcomes based on the work that you are doing? And the more you're able to have a business conversation about the work, the more value you'll be seen to provide, and the more opportunities you'll have to be able to keep going.
Yeah, because we do a lot of intuition in L&D, like, oh, we think this will work, or let's do it this way. It's like, you wouldn't build a product feature had you not done some beta testing on it. Do the same thing.
That's right. Lori, you and I go way back, how to think like a marketer, right? I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. We've said a lot of positive things about skills-based organization. So I have one from one of our attendees here. Many organizations have challenges with engaging employees to learn. Do you think that employees are interested in skills than learning in general? Back to value.
I think it's how the company positions it. So first of all, you need psychological safety for people to actually want to learn. People are not going to invest if they know they're on a sinking ship. Okay, or if they feel that at any moment they could be pushed off the ship. And so I think that's a big thing. People are always learning, though. You just don't see it. And they may be learning other things. They may be doing all sorts of stuff, but it's just not visible to you. So I think that's a wider cultural engagement conversation than being just that practical. Like, do people care about skills as they care about learning? I think it's also ties into what I was saying earlier, that you need to give people direction when it comes to what they should be learning. When I pull up a learning management system, most companies, I will find that the content that is consumed the most will be, Excel is a big one. And then it will be leadership, something like that, coaching or whatnot, or project management. When you really deep dive into that, it's because people are consuming that because they feel that's the only way to elevate themselves in their career. And so that becomes a lot of wasted time. So being able to direct people, I think, is also too what ignites that passion. Having pathways for them to see themselves reflected in is critical.
And I think, building on what you're saying, Laurie, because I agree with everything you said. I think one of the challenges that companies are facing right now is that we're talking about the supply and demand of skills and talent. And so if you think about the supply, that's where the employees are coming with the skills. And if you give them learning pathways or expectations, et cetera, and they do it, there's a reasonable expectation that you will be able to apply those skills that they've built into work that needs to get done, which helps them advance in their career in meaningful ways for them. And I think part of the breakdown right now is that even if we're defining work and jobs through skills, and we're setting out pathways and learning expectations for people around building skills, the two don't always meet. And so you've got lots of people who are building their skills, but they're not actually being deployed to apply those skills to work that drives impact. And so I think that's almost a contract breaking down within the organization, which creates skepticism. So as people are building skills, if they can't apply them and they're not rewarded for them, they're going to start to look elsewhere, or they're going to think about other ways that they can get the validation out of the time that they've invested. And so I think that's almost the gap. If you're not clear about what you're going to be doing with people who are building these skills, there may be some healthy skepticism about whether they should build them or whether you need to know that they're building them.
That's great.
Really good point.
Gina, so there's a bit of employee value proposition. We always talk about what's the value to L&D, what's the value of HR, what's the value to the employee. A lot of our attendees, and based on this question, they're shifting from traditional organizations to what we're talking about, the future of work. The next question is around, I'm transforming a traditional hierarchical organization into a skills-first paradigm. How should I navigate the inherent resistance to entrenched structures, cultural inertia, and potential fears among coworkers while ensuring that the transition is not superficial, but deeply ingrained in the organization's DNA? Thought.
I think as much as anything, what you're talking about is really fantastic change management and change support, because you need to help bring people along on the journey. You're not just flipping a switch to go from where they are today into a skills first paradigm. You're really focusing on what's the so what of this. And I think so many organizations get caught up in, we're going to be a skills based organization, but why? What's the purpose? What are you actually trying to achieve? And skills can help you get there, but just, the end goal is not to be a skills based organization. So if you can get people to buy into what that future vision looks like, how it is better than where you are today, how it offers opportunity to them, whether they're a business leader, whether they are an employee within a team, et cetera, if they can buy into that greater positive opportunity and where you're going, then you can help them understand, what does it take for us to get from here to there? And what's your part in it? What will happen to you along the way as you're buying into this? How will we support you? How will you be rewarded? What will enable you to do that you can't do today? And why is that a good thing? And I think that continual change message around positive opportunity, and it can also include we'll have hard points. We'll have points that feel like a struggle, but remember, we're getting here. And that's going to be better for all of us. That arc, that change arc, is so critical, because then it helps people understand the big why. And then they'll understand why it makes sense to be able to build skills, to be able to apply skills, to be able to speak the language of skills, etc. But it's not in and of itself about the skills. It's about the outcome you're trying to achieve together and the impact you can make on customers, on employees, on each other in a team, on society, etc. That's the stuff that really matters and people rally behind. Link it to that. Don't link it to being a skills organization.
Awesome, Gina. Love it. Something that you said reminded me, and just giving a little bit of the other debate. So I was in Singapore end of last year, and we had this beautiful slide. It was a continuum of becoming a skills-based organization. And what was fascinating and interesting to me is we put skills-based as the utopian state. Learning culture was somewhere in the middle, and we've all talked about learning culture. And what was interesting was this learning professional said, actually, we aspire to be a culture of learning, not skills-based. We've always been skills-based. So I just share that with you because there's geographical or global variances around what skills actually means to people. Just a thought. All right. Well, we've actually covered a ton, and today was really a flavor of a lot of different things. As we think about, today's session and some of the things that people would like to take away, a lot of people talk big picture, big thoughts. And I think one of the things that we always get feedback on is, what are those tactical, pragmatic things that I could actually do today that can start the journey to something bigger? Many do not even know where to start. So in the last 10 minutes, I would love to hear from both of you. I know you consult with a lot of global customers all over the globe. What would be those kind of 3 takeaways that people can start thinking about as they think about what they can do next within their organization? So I'll start with you, Lori.
Probably the one really big one that we do with our clients is starting with a data strategy, and this is in the absence of having a chief skills officer. Okay, so put that off to the side. But what do I mean by that? Well, we actually have a calculation that we use to help you decide, do you want to build a skill, or is it more cost effective to get it externally, given all of the costs? And so we start looking at things like, if we can't get a hold of talent acquisition, we start talking to them, and we start looking at job postings and saying which ones have been posted for more than 8 weeks, and what skills are in that. We start looking at what's your internal mobility like. We start looking at all of these, start putting together some of these data points, because that's going to tell me, to Gina's point, the end is not to be a skills-based organization, but the end point is to be a good business, and a healthy and thriving business. And so a lot of these data points can tell us how far we actually even are on that journey. And a lot of times what we do uncover is that there are places where things are happening, places where they aren't happening. But I like to look at that data just to then get a level set to figure out where we are, and start to be able to have those conversations. I never go in and say, hey, we're going to move to a skills-based organization. That's what we're going to do today. That it just isn't the conversation that comes up. And in fact, it will turn people off. So the data strategy, I think, is a really big one. But I think even before that, it's also getting out of the L&D mindset and talking to the other areas, particularly of HR and of the business, and start making those inroads. You'll probably find that others are already further along on this journey, or may already be thinking about it, and it's something that might happen to you rather than you leading it, which is okay. This is you need that momentum. But having some of those conversations, start with having them now, and that's everything from the PMO to the HR to talent mobility, all of those places, because that's going to give you again that picture. So those are my two initial starting points. And if I had to have a third, I'll pause on that. I'll turn it over to Gina.
All
I
right.
think it's great advice, Lori. I think that it's so important to tap into the wisdom of other people in the industry. And I think learning people especially are incredibly willing to share their successes and their learnings along the way. Probably 90% of everything we do is not proprietary. So tap into people who are at different places in the journey, get their learnings. But that doesn't mean follow what they have said. What it means is be true to your own strategy. So understand your business strategy, understand what's critical to your organization and what's differentiating about your organization and its aspirations. So ground yourself in all of that, an external view and an internal view, and then be really clear on a critical problem that you can solve. How do you prioritize where to start? What is the biggest pain point? What is something that's connected in one way or another to the opportunities around learning and skill development to solve a business issue? And then zero in on that problem. So, as I mentioned earlier, are there specific skills that can help to address that business issue? Focus there, break them down. How strong are you in being able to build those skills to the level required? Where are people today? Do you have a strength in that area that's maybe unsurfaced? Well, then unsurface it. Do you have a gap in terms of the skills not being available? How do you build them, or do you hire for them? How do you actually know how you're moving the dial? Like, get very prescriptive as you start to peel back. It's like the 5 whys, starting to peel back the layers of what do you have, what do you need, and how do you move the dial? But make sure that everything you do is true to your company, true to your culture, true to your strategy, that you're not just lifting and shifting what somebody else is doing, but don't operate in a vacuum. Learn from everybody around you and find a practical way of prioritizing steps to move the dial within your company.
And one thing Gina talks about, and if you've heard her speak, which is, it's a wonderful thing, when she say, take advantage of those wind in your sails moments, that and look for them. And I've certainly heeded that advice several times. Thank you, Gina. Where it's, understanding when that hits, take advantage of that momentum rather than trying to create the momentum in places where there just isn't any, because it's going to be harder for you to do. But if you can capitalize on those moments, it really does serve you well. So thank you for that advice.
Awesome.
Thanks, Lori. And I think part of it is, you have to keep your finger on the pulse of where the industry is going, where technology is going, where
Yep.
opportunities may spring up from. So if you actually have a very informed perspective about what you can do, then you can kind of keep that behind the curtain, looking for those wind in the sails opportunities. Because when leaders have a business problem to solve and they're willing to invest in solving it, you can be a fantastic partner saying, hey, I think I know how we can solve this together. And that helps you accelerate your strategy. It helps you actually gain momentum more broadly for the organization by solving a particular problem that somebody in the organization is willing to sponsor and fund because it helps them get business done. So you have to be a little bit opportunistic and entrepreneurial as you're trying to work through, but you can get things funded outside your budget and you can show then practical business impact against this particular initiative and gain an ambassador along the way who will be more than happy to advocate for learning and skill development.
I think all that, and I think there's also too something to be said about, not also too chasing the shiny things. I have tons of clients right now who everyone knows to know about AI. How many people, bought a prompting course, right? We all did. And did we really need it? And does everyone need to know that? And do we all like there? I think, so it's being very, very practical about what the business needs to do. Because I do see a lot of that. We're not going to be current unless we do X, or unless everybody knows X or Y or Z. Be very mindful of what that is. And again, at the end of all of this, there's a person on the other end of this who is going to have to stay relevant or possibly be made redundant. Like, that's the lens we look at things through. And so keeping that at the forefront is so critical. Yes, it's about the business, but there's a person there too.
Yeah.
And I think if you have that Lego mentality, sorry,
go
Susie.
ahead, go ahead, Gina.
If you have that Lego mentality, you can break down problems into bite-sized pieces. So, Laura, you brought up AI. One of the most important sets of skills around AI are things like critical thinking and risk management and ethics and so on. So it's not about the technical building of things or technical utilization, although I believe in prompt engineering, but it's actually more about critical thinking and risk management and bias and so on, to be able to actually understand, if you are interacting with AI, what's good, what's biased, what's ethical, etc. And those skills actually transcend beyond the tech space. So I think you can be really smart about how you break problems down and where you invest time and effort and so on, and how you get people engaged.
Yeah. Well, I can sit here and talk to you for at least another couple hours. A lot of people are navigating through a lot of change, which some of us, we just touched upon. And there are some that are early in on their journey. And I think what you highlighted for me, Gina, which was not teed up, is the power of community and how people amongst the peer group, amongst the business, can help everybody leapfrog on some of those challenges and clear the path. And so with that, I wanted to thank both of you for being amazing colleagues, amazing Canadians, amazing professionals. I really appreciate all the great conversation. For those joining us today, it is an open conversation, and as many of you can see, it's a complex conversation to be had. There's certainly a lot of things to unpack, whether it's opportunities or, skepticism or just bold movements that everybody needs to take. Well, the shift is your community powered by Degreed. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to join us, turn on your notifications. This is a group of very passionate people, as Gina and Lori helped to kick us off in our most inaugural event, and you'll see much, much more from the shift. If you've got a burning question, nothing's off the table, please make sure you join us. Ask the questions, learn from the insights. There are peer groups all across the globe that are contributing to the space. And so we look forward to your contributions on the future of work, and let's stay connected. We want all of us to shape what this might look like as we go into the future and beyond. So thank you, and we'll see you again on the shift.